Happy Friday, everyone. It is Friday where we are, where we're recording. Hopefully it's a Friday for you, or at least a good, fun day. Today we are here to talk about Secret Invasion, Marvel's Disney Plus miniseries. A lot to unpack with this one.
Yeah, definitely.
I first would like to say, how are you doing, Cam?
Good, I'm great. I've been starting up spooky season. I just watched Fear Street last night. Hopefully going to see some new horror movies. Talk to Me just came out. There's a movie called Cobweb that...
I was just going to mention that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I really want to see it. It's not playing anywhere near me, though, unfortunately. Luckily, Talk to Me is, so I'm probably going to see that next week.
Yeah, that Cobweb I thought looked really interesting.
I actually haven't seen the trailer for either of those movies, so I want to try to go in blind, but I've heard both are good, so...
Always want to try to start spooky season movie watching early, because there's never enough time.
Right. And yeah, to me, August is kind of the beginning of like the summer spooky season, because like July's over, so it starts to cool down a little bit. And I think it's good to watch, like, Fear Street has that great summer atmosphere, summer camp and everything, and then Friday the 13th and that sort of thing. So I like to get started around this time. Not that it ever really ends, because I'm constantly watching horror movies, but... Totally.
All right, well, we must deal with Secret Invasion. Yeah, I'll just jump in and say, first and foremost, this is one of my most anticipated Marvel shows since I heard about it, just because I love Sam Jackson and Nick Fury. I love this idea of the sort of mashup of, with Skrulls and it just having that sort of alien invasion motif to it. So I was like looking forward to this as much as any Marvel series, and everything we saw trailer wise and just what you heard about it was all like, oh yes, this is gonna be, it's gonna have these total Winter Soldier vibes and be this really espionage focused storyline, etc. The cast is phenomenal. Couldn't have asked for a better cast, and who all did an amazing job, I think, with what they were given. But I guess my overall initial take is just this was a complete disappointment. Just didn't seem like they had any real story in mind. Some really disappointing moments in terms of how certain characters were handled, I thought. And you eventually, it seemed like for the first few episodes, before we get into too much detail, but just, this is the feeling I got. I just kept waiting for, like, okay, what's the hook? What's the hook, and what's the sort of either conflict or objective that we're progressing towards? And it was just so unclear, or jumped from sort of one thing to the next. One thing seemed important that then were not important. And eventually we get around to this, okay, Skrulls are unhappy with what's been going on, so they're just going to try to, or this faction of them is going to try to take over the world. And then, of course, eventually we get into the whole Super Skrull thing, which we'll get into later. And I was just like, and then the way it ended, I won't talk about that now. I was just like, huh? Like, yeah. So that's
my reaction to the ending too.
My initial reaction is such anticipation followed by just such disappointment.
I'm kind of on the same lines. I was really hoping that this one would be great. They did Winter Soldier so well, so it seemed like they were trying to kind of go back to that, like you mentioned. But yeah, no, to me, it just seemed like like you said, I was just waiting for there to be a greater point, for there to be kind of some sort of something to draw me in, like leading towards somewhere, but it just never felt like it was really going anywhere. And yeah, it to me, it just seemed like it served just to kill off two of my favorite, I don't want to say major characters, because they were mostly side characters, but like, and I guess we're getting into spoilers now, so if you don't want to know who they killed off, then pause here, but I just want to get in. I was just disappointed that they killed off Maria Hill and Talos, and just for the sake of there being some sort of stakes. Like, Maria Hill was only in the first episode briefly, and her death didn't really have any greater meaning or purpose other than just to motivate Nick Fury, I guess. And just the choices that they kept making didn't make any sense. And just overall, I know I've said this about some of the other Marvel movies, especially like Thor Love and Thunder and Quantumania, I thought were very weak. But this one, I think, just takes the cake for being there just didn't seem like there was any passion in anything, from the writing to the story to even the acting and direction were just like so one note. Sam Jackson did the best. I mean, he had some great moments, but it seemed like all the actors were just kind of sleeping through their delivery. And the people that did get kind of interesting roles to play, especially Rhodey, I thought was played way over the top, opposite of what he is in the movie, like previously. So it was so obvious he was a Skrull, and there was no suspense. There wasn't a lot of like who was a Skrull and who isn't. It was just kind of like checking the boxes, like, oh, Nick Fury has to like do this action because it's a spy thriller and he needs to like look around in a big crowd of people and he needs to have a chase scene. And it seemed like they were just going through the motions and not really, there wasn't any point to any of it.
Yes. I wanted you to talk about too, something you mentioned to me when you originally watched. I know you sort of started and stopped, but just how some of the scenes between some of the principals, you were like, are they even in the same room together?
It did seem like there was a lot of reshoots and a lot of like cutting back and forth to singular people, because it seemed like they needed to adjust dialogue and actors probably weren't able to get in the same room again. And it just seemed like, yeah, I read that this actually, they'd made some major changes, like 4 months of reshoots, which was, I think, the same length of time it took to shoot originally.
Wow.
Like 4 months is like a ridiculous amount. And apparently they rewrote at least 3 of the episodes from the ground up. So it seems like it was a total mishmash of 2 different people writing. And then my kind of theory is, based on what I've read, I feel like this was originally going to be even more kind of slow and talky. And then they realized that it was so boring and so pointless that they needed some sort of action. So they brought in all the Super Skrull and CGI crazy stuff towards the end to try to punch it up a little bit.
Interesting. It just seemed directionless. And it just seemed like they tried to drive what plot there was by these sort of obscure things that have happened in previous Marvel movies, and to make everything hang together. And it's funny how, not to get into this larger point, but it's funny how the first 3 phases were, you know, everyone was so on board, and then there were all these fans out there, just casual fans, that all of a sudden were into, you know, they jumped on board, they got up to speed with Marvel, and then people were loving all the little connection points. And I think I remember seeing Feige talking about doing the Disney Plus shows right as that was kicking off. And I think people were so into it by Endgame, even the casual fans, that I think they thought, people love this interconnectedness and love having to see this movie to understand that movie. And that may have reached a fever pitch around Infinity War and Endgame, but I think people quickly kind of got worn out by that. And I think that almost was their whole premise with all these Disney Plus shows, was the back and forth. And I think trying to do all that has just become, they've gotten away from what made the movies in the first 3 phases so good, which was, yes, they all did connect together, but you could watch them whether you knew what the connections were or not. And case in point, well, the reason why I went on that tangent is because it just seemed like we saw Talos, and I forget his wife's name. I know she was dead by the time the show started, but in the post-credit scenes for Far From Home, and so you see, it turns out that, you know, Maria and Nick were actually Talos and his wife, and they're talking to Nick, and then you see Nick on the space station, and it was like, whoa, wow, what is it? So, but like, that happened after Endgame, and we don't know how, you know, Nick, where he unblipped or whatever, how all that happened, but like. Right. There was nothing behind that. It was just almost like, to me, like a throwaway post-credit scene. And they almost like tried to build a whole show around that. So like, just the whole idea of like, what the hell, you know, I know he was putting together Sword or whatever else, you know, supposedly, but who the hell knows like that? And especially if you're a casual fan. So Nick comes back to Earth from the space station. It was just so awkward how, you know, why was he there? How come he hasn't kept in touch with Maria Hill or his now wife that came out of no place? Yeah. And, you know, what did he do after the blip? It just, and they tried to drive this whole show about it. And we got this like tired Nick Fury who kind of couldn't do anything. And then we got this whole idea of this, Nick Fury promised the Skrulls all this stuff back in the 90s, and they've done his bidding for all these years, and he just kind of flaked out on them, and so now they're pissed, and so now a certain group of Skrulls wants to take over the world and wipe out humanity. First there was the bombing in Russia, then there was the imposters on the Navy boat out and where, and then they, when Talos and Nick had to sneak into somebody's house to thwart that plot. It just it was just like all over the place. And then finally you get to this Super Skrull thing, and then just the way they played Gaia, I don't know. And just to your speaking about the rewrites, her character was so, I mean, I think I love Emilia Clarke and she did a great job, but her character was so just back and forth that I think in a previous version that maybe she had sort of abandoned her father and kind of did go to the dark side and didn't come back, because it just, her character from episode to episode was so inconsistent. And obviously you can chalk that up to be, no, she's just this super double agent, and fine, but it doesn't seem like that was the original intent. Yeah.
There's a few points actually I want to follow up on. The first one being like the whole interconnectedness and casual fans. This did so, like, especially the first episode, which is why I was so like down on the first episode as soon as it came out, and I didn't watch the rest of the series until it was done. Is like they had so much to fill in, and so much like expositional dialogue, like like that whole scene with Ross and the agent at the beginning. Like, he needed to explain Nick Fury, and he needed to explain the just all the context. And at first it was like, okay, and then as he kept going, and then it felt like that whole episode was just trying to fill you in on what's happened. But it ultimately doesn't really matter, because like you were saying with that Far From Home post-credit scene, it did seem like they had some sort of idea or were building towards something, especially with Nick Fury on the space station, and that like plays a part in the series, but they don't actually like address it. They don't say what he was doing up there all this time. Like what happened, like how he got blipped back and that sort of thing. And then so he comes down, and then by the end and like you said, he's like almost totally helpless throughout the whole series, and it's kind of like sad. And I know that they're trying to do the whole like, he's out of practice from being old and he was blipped and everything else, but you would expect there to be some sort of big finale where he comes back from that at the end, but then he doesn't really. And to your point about Emilia Clarke and her character, they made this whole big deal about, Nick Fury has to go and be the one who defeats Gravik and everything, but then at the end it ends up it's not even Nick Fury, it's Emilia Clarke, and Nick Fury has already like gone off up back to space. So it's like, what? It seems like we're just back at square one now. And like the Skrulls still don't have a planet. The president has like sent out a kill order on all the Skrulls and everything.
Right.
And it just seemed like it was so much, and then it was almost like a bad ending.
Yeah.
And it was just so slow. There was just so much of that expositional stuff and very clunky dialogue, and not a lot of. The action scenes that were there were pretty good. I liked that assault on the president. That was crazy. There were a couple other good action scenes, but yeah, it seemed like they were just putting in like kind of staples of spy movies. Like, we have to stop the missile. We have to interrogate the guy before the missile hits. Or we have to, like I said earlier, we have to like search this big crowd of people and square in on the bomber. And it just seemed like they were throwing that in because they promised spy show, but there wasn't any real intrigue or mystery as to who was a Skrull and who wasn't, and it just kind of felt deflated. And then the Super Skrull thing just totally almost came out of nowhere, and that opens up a whole can of worms. Does that mean Gaia is now the most, like, the powers they chose to portray at the end were just like Captain Marvel, like she's like the most powerful superhero in the Marvel universe, and now Gaia just has her powers plus every single other superhero ever. So
right.
I don't know. It just seemed like especially that last like I said to you when I first watched it, that last episode was just embarrassing because it was just like, I had no idea what they were trying to do, and then it ended on such a low note, and kind of I don't want to say cliffhanger, but it just seems like this doesn't lead into Marvels at all. So I'm wondering why even set up all the Skrull stuff in the first Captain Marvel. It's just weird.
Yeah, right. So Nick Fury comes back to Earth because there's rumblings of some Skrull discord, and right, he doesn't really he's not an active part in doing anything to really help it. It's just like they seem to go from one thing to the next, and that applies to the Skrulls too. Like Gravik, Ben Kingsley Adir, he's really good. He used to be in that show Vera that I love, that British detective show.
Oh yeah,
for a few seasons. But like he was just random nasty evil guy,
right,
doing nasty evil things. And he, even from episode to episode, it didn't seem like he had a plan. He said, okay, we're going to do this. Then now we're going to do this. Now we're going to do that. And then, oh, no. And then, oh, but wait, the Super Skrull thing is going on in the background. Yeah, and you were right. Like, Nick Fury comes back to Earth because of this Skrull thing that's happening. He does nothing really the only material thing he does is save the president. And then him and Olivia Colman, who plays the MI6 leader there, they fight off the Skrulls and make sure the president doesn't get shot. But yes, at the end, Nick Fury just leaves, and after losing two of the closest people to him in his life, and having not resolved anything, and now the Skrull situation is worse than it was when he came back. So it was just like, what was the point of all this?
Right, yeah. It just felt like it was very talky because they felt like it had to be talky because this was like a mature, more violent and everything else, and I almost felt like they were going for like an Andor.
I was just gonna say that. You took the words out of my mouth. Go ahead.
But yeah, no, I mean, obviously Andor had so much weight and great writing and dialogue and everything else, and this was like kindergartner level stuff.
Yeah, the plot was just so. It was like when we were complaining about like the Obi-Wan Kenobi or the Boba Fett episodes. It would just like the plots were just so like color by numbers. It was just like, what are we doing? So yeah, a couple of other things I want to touch on. You teed them up. The deaths of two of the most important people in Nick Fury's life. I mean, I had no idea they were going to kill off Maria Hill, but like, could it have been any more of a fart in church, meaningless
I know, yeah.
death, just in terms of there was no drama or action or bravery or anything. It was just like, oh, what? He walks up to her, he shoots her, she's dead. And Nick goes,
right, and that was it.
And that was it. When when Talos dies during trying to save the president, it's like, okay, yeah, he died saving the president, so I guess that's sort of heroic or whatever. But it was just like, I thought for sure he wasn't really dead, because I'm like, after all the quasi-meaningful sort of confrontation, personal confrontation that he and Nick had throughout the show, and he just dies.
Right.
It just made no sense.
Yeah, and I really liked both. I mean, obviously, Maria Hill has been kind of, I don't want to say shafted, but like, there hasn't been a whole lot for her to do, but like her roles, her appearances have always been fun, and she's just been kind of that one of those good kind of connective tissue characters that shows up everywhere. And it almost seems like, I don't know if maybe Ben and Kobe Smulders were just done and they just wanted to get out of it, and maybe it was just an excuse to kill them off or something. I don't know, but either way, it was just very disappointing to have those two characters just kind of die unceremoniously. Yeah,
and then the other thing I want to touch on is just like you said, and I got this feeling this is an espionage show with like no espionage. Like it's like it's funny because I remember when I was midway through watching Secret Invasion, I started the final season of Jack Ryan, and I'm just like the difference. Going from supposedly one espionage-based show,
right,
Marvel show to Jack Ryan, I was like, this is what I expected, Like it just the tone, it was just, I remember just being like, whoa, like, unfortunately, it even lessened my opinion of what they did here with Secret Invasion. Right. But the other point I wanted to say, like, building on that, what they did too was they have all these great actors. Like, this probably, I think this probably has the highest count of sort of like A-list actors of any Marvel TV show so far.
Oh yeah, definitely, yeah.
And so, like I said, we talked about Emilia Clarke. She was fine. She did a great job with what she was given. The whole, yes, they've created this whole nightmare for themselves with her being this, whatever she is, Super Skrull now. But up to then, her character could have been an interesting, like, maybe, I don't know if side character is the right thing, but she could have played an interesting part like some other characters that aren't front and center have played over the years. But now I think they just have to, and I guarantee you something's going to happen that's just going to quickly resolve and make this whole Super Skrull thing go away, because they're going to not know what to do to deal with it. For the principals, I noticed, and it was like so palpable when they would switch into, okay, here's Nick's big actorly Hamlet speech that he's going to make. And he delivered it so passionately. And they always have those scenes where, Nick talks about like growing up, back in the day and everything else. So he had his speech, and then Talos, Ben Mendelsohn got his big actorly speech when he said, Nick, we really did everything. You wouldn't be you if we hadn't done everything we've done over the last week. So he got his big Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet speech. And then Don Cheadle came in, and when they sat down in the restaurant, and he got his like high-powered dressing down Nick Fury. So he got his speech. And then Olivia Colman, she played, they just wrote her as this like one-note combination of like Judi Dench's M from the Bond movies and Fiona Shaw, who plays a similar character in that show Killing Eve. And so she was just like, and she made all these like snappy, MI6 lady speeches, and she's great. She's another actor who I love in a bunch of British shows, but I don't even know why she was there.
Yeah.
I mean, she sort of, I guess because some of it took place in London and there was some shootouts in London, and she's this old friend of Nick, but it's just, I don't know. It was just, but she got to have her little snappy moments, but like every time they went into one of those speeches, I would sit there and go like, okay, wow, here we go. The actors really showing off their chops, but it just felt so forced. And I'm like, this is a great speech, but it's got nothing to do with the plot. It's not advancing the story at all.
Right.
And then, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say, it does stink that Olivia Colman's character was so kind of superfluous, because she was probably one of the best parts of it. I just thought her like delivery and everything was really funny. And same with Ben Kingsley Adir there. I thought he had some really great moments where he like freaked out at Nick Fury, but it was so like, it was just that, and that was it. And like his motivation and everything else was so paper thin that it was just kind of felt hollow. But those were the two bright spots, I think, in terms of acting, aside from Nick Fury getting his occasionally funny line and that sort of thing. But those two I thought were probably as inconsistent and pointless as they kind of were, where they did the best with the material they were given.
Totally. The one other thing I wanted to get to, which gets into, like maybe we can focus a little bit specifically on the finale, was the whole Vara, Nick Fury's wife, that came out of nowhere plotline, and I was just like, I don't get it. Like, so we went, like, all of a sudden there was like, I forget when I think she came in at about the third episode, and there was this kind of like,
I think so, yeah.
There was this kind of, I forget what, there was some sort of like kind of event that sent Nick into a tailspin, or he didn't know what to do next or whatever else, and then boom, we open episode whatever it was, 3 or 4, and honey, I'm home, and that's fine if you want to like have Nick secretly having having had a wife, and I get the whole her, she being a Skrull and he's human, and they get together, and that's all great and everything. But it didn't make any sense. And then it culminated for me in the thing where she was supposed to kill Nick, and again, going back to the inconsistency and maybe some of the rewrites, she seemed like she was tasked to kill Nick, and then maybe she was going to, but then I guess maybe she wasn't. But like, wouldn't Gravik have known if he knew that her and Nick were like married and close? Like, what are the chances?
I think one of the characters, maybe Gaia or something, I think says to Gravik, like, you knew she couldn't do it, or you knew she wasn't going to be able to do it, or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And then the scene where they actually, like, it seems like Nick and her sitting across the table from each other with their guns, and it seems like they are having this sort of détente, and maybe her loyalties really are with the Skrulls, and Nick is like he almost has this like, I knew all along that I wouldn't really be able to trust you, or blah blah blah. And then they both shoot at the wall. I was like,
yeah, that didn't make any sense. I didn't understand that.
I was like, are they under surveillance? So were trying to make it look like they really had some kind of confrontation. I was like, why?
Right, yeah.
What was the point of all this? Yeah, it just was. I was like, what? And then for me, then the whole thing was after the Super Skrull battle, and and the president's acting like a dick and going, trying to wipe out the Skrulls, and Nick's just like, well, bye, we're leaving, and honey, will you come with me? And she says, yes, I'll come with you. And then all of a sudden, and they almost had to invent a reason for that to happen. Oh yeah, we're in contact with the Kree, and they, and they want to make up with you guys and have a peace treaty and find your planet. And I was like, and so that was supposed to be the wrap up. Those two, like, the first 3 episodes had nothing to do with a Nick Fury marriage or relationship, but the whole show ends on this supposedly big emotional crescendo of Nick and his wife flying off into the sunset to save the Skrulls. It just made no sense.
Yeah, very like hollow and directionless. Yeah.
What other thoughts do you have? Anything around the sort of production or effects or?
I mean, I thought the effects were mostly fine towards that. I mean, the finale with the Super Skrulls, some of it looked really good, some of it didn't. The filmmaking and stuff was very average. Nothing in particular stood out, but it wasn't like bad per se.
Right.
Yeah, I just it was just very the writing and the plot, I think, were the biggest letdowns.
Yeah, it's just like it's like we want to do a secret invasion spy show and go. Like,
right.
It's just well, the one thing I will say too is I thought the title sequence was awesome and really cool and interesting and different, and that it promised so much that was just not delivered by the show itself.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the trailers and stuff were like that too. It like just like who's a Skrull and all that sort of thing. There wasn't really any of that.
No. Yeah.
And I guess this is a little bit random and specific, but like just that scene at the end where it was like Rhodey and the president and him, and they were like wheeling the president around in a stretcher or whatever in a hospital bed, and it just was very silly. It wasn't like it was being portrayed as it was supposed to be, like intense and suspenseful, but it just felt very like, oh, I don't know, he's a Skrull. Like, oh, well, we still haven't had any sort of suspense over who's a Skrull yet, so we have to have that scene.
Right.
So, yeah, overall disappointing, and I think probably, I mean, as much as I hate to say this over and over again, but I think by a large margin, this is probably just the worst MCU thing. Because at least Quantumania and Love and Thunder had very bright spots and were fairly competent. Quantumania, I think, had closer issues to this than Love and Thunder did.
And the thing was, we were all like, after Guardians, we thought, we're back on the upswing, and I thought this would carry it on. I haven't watched the second trailer for the Marvels because I want to be surprised by the movies, because I feel like we used to be able to say, even if I'm not surprised by what happens in a Marvel movie because there's so many leaks and spoilers and people just talking theories all the time. The movies were so good that it didn't matter. Now it's like, I want to preserve the surprise because so many of the other elements of the more recent films have been so disappointing. So right. I don't want to know. And so, yeah, so we'll see. But what I will say, again, what I've seen of the Marvels, it looks like it could be good. I think the idea of what the plot's supposed to be about seems interesting, so we'll see.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I don't know if it is at all connected to this. It doesn't seem like it is.
Well, they say that Maria Hill is in it.
Oh, really? Huh.
Yeah. So I don't know whether maybe there's some of it takes place before. Who the hell knows? Well, because Nick is on his space station. We know that from the trailer.
Right. Well, I kind of thought maybe that's why he went back to the space station at the end, because like he needed to be up there for Marvels and they didn't plan it or something. I don't know.
Or maybe she's involved in brokering this peace between the Skrulls and the Kree, or who the heck.
Oh, and actually, you saying that kind of reminded me. I totally thought Sharon Carter was going to play some sort of role as a power broker. And she was going to be a Skrull, and that's why she was acting so weird. And that would be a tie-in. And
I know. There's another character I missed that I would hope will come back in some useful and meaningful way.
Oh, I know, yeah. Oh, and there was a whole bunch of rumors that like Melinda May and Quake and everybody would be coming, but that obviously
that would have been it. That would have been awesome. That would have made for a much more interesting show. If this had been like one of the good season finales of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., it would have been 10 times better than it was.
Oh yeah, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is looking really good compared to a lot of these shows now.
Yeah, the Loki trailer looks good.
Yeah, it looks really good, but I mean, who knows?
Yeah, exactly. Like I'm almost like I feel like I can't have any gauge on from the marketing materials what a show is going to be like, because there's just been things have been so inconsistent.
Right.
But
yeah.
Looking forward to Loki, and because Loki has such a solid grounding of its first season being pretty solid over and very good, you would think that hopefully they can pick up where they left off, and high hopes for that. What else are you looking forward to?
Let's see. In terms of Marvel, I don't know. I feel like we don't really know a lot in terms of the future of Marvel. I feel like a lot of that stuff is up in the air right now.
Right. I know the schedule's gotten pushed around a little bit more.
Right.
I think they really pushed and backed off on those 2 Avengers movies after Quantumania was such a debacle.
Yeah, I'm interested in seeing. And then, of course, there's a new Fantastic Four casting every 5 minutes, so that'll be interesting. But there's a new, in terms of not Marvel, there's a new Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie that looks really good. Animated, done by Seth Rogen, and has a whole bunch of A-list stars. Probably going to go see that. And then, obviously, the horror movies.
Mm-hmm. Ahsoka, I think, comes out pretty soon.
Oh too, I forgot about that.
Looking forward to that. We won't cover it on our podcast, but I know the Wheel of Time second season is coming. I was kind of,
oh wow, huh?
As someone who read the books, I was kind of didn't love that show. It just, and I wasn't like, it had nothing to do with any of the castings or anything like that. I just thought it just seemed like very TV show-ish. Like in terms of production quality to me and writing, so I was
interesting. Yeah, I kind of forgot that came out.
Yeah, I'll probably give it a watch. Then heading into spooky season pretty soon.
Yeah, looking forward to a bunch of new horror movies coming out.
Excellent. Well, I think that is a wrap on the very unfortunately disappointing Secret Invasion. And we will hope for better things with the next Marvel installments coming up. I will
definitely.
I will add my every episode public service announcement to watch Lockwood & Co. on Netflix and read that amazing book series by Jonathan Stroud, and help us support getting that renewed for a season 2.
Yeah, I don't really have anything else to say, so I guess we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, guys. Take care.